All right, guys. So as I mentioned, we'll be using Postman to make requests to our back end because at first we're not going to have a React front end to test anything or anything like that. So Postman is a great client to use. There's other ones out there as well. This happens to be my favorite. But basically, we can make GET requests, post, put, all these different requests to certain endpoints. We can also pass headers, header values, body values. We can add, authorization and stuff like that. So this program is fantastic. And we can also create what are called collections where we can put, different folders, whether if it's a different resource, maybe you have blog posts, maybe you have products, and you can separate all your requests and you can actually save those requests. So we'll be utilizing this as well. So let's go ahead and just minimize that for a little bit. And let's create a new folder for our project. And I'm going to call this contact-keeper. And I'm going to go ahead and open this with VS Code. And then let's open the integrated terminal. So I'm going to go ahead and initialize a package.json. So we're going to do an npm init, and I'm just going to add the -y flag here. Okay, so that will create a package.json, as you can see, which doesn't have much in it. I guess I'll go ahead and add a description here. So we'll just say contact manager app. And I'm also going to change the main file here to server.js. All right, so now let's go ahead and install our dependencies. So we have a bunch of regular dependencies and we have a couple dev dependencies. So let's start with the regular ones. So npm install, and first one we have is Express, which is our web framework. That's how we can handle routing and all that stuff. We're also going to need bcrypt.js, which is going to handle hashing our passwords. You never want to store plain text passwords because we are going to be using authentication. And we're using JSON Web Token for authentication. So we can create what's called a JWT, or a JSON Web Token. We can send that back and forth, and we can use it to basically access protected routes on our server. Okay, or on a back end. We're also going to use a package called config for global variables. We're going to use express-validator to validate any body data that's coming in. Like, for instance, the user has to have an email that's being sent, a password, and so on. And then the last thing we're going to use is Mongoose, which is basically an abstraction layer so that we can deal with our database, so we can add data, read data, delete it, all that stuff. All right, so those are and it also allows us to create models. So those are the main dependencies we're going to be using. So let's install all of those. Okay, and then we have a couple dev dependencies. So we're going to do npm install -d. NodeMon is the first one, which will allow us to keep watching our server so we don't have to keep manually restarting it every time we make a change. And then we're also going to be using concurrently, which will allow us to basically run our back end and the front end React server at the same time. So we won't be using this until later on, but I just want to get everything installed now. So let's go ahead and run that, and that should add some dev dependencies down here. And keep in mind, we're going to have a completely separate package.json for our client side for our React application. You can basically think of them as completely separate entities. All right, so we have that stuff. Now let's add a couple scripts here. So I'm going to have one called start. And this is just our basic start script that will be used on deployment. So it's going to run node and then the name of our file, which we don't have yet, but it will be called server.js. And then we also want, for now, just a server script, so we can say npm run server, and that's basically our dev environment. So this is going to run nodemon and then server.js. Okay, and we'll add more scripts later on when we have the client and we have React set up. So let's close that up and let's create our server.js. And this is basically the entry point to our back end. So we're going to just start off by creating a very basic Express server. So we'll go ahead and bring in Express. And if you haven't used Express, or if you haven't used basically Node and as a backend language, or I'm sorry, backend technology, I guess you could say, we can't use the import syntax without implementing something like Babel or TypeScript or something like that. Otherwise, we have to use this syntax to bring in modules, which is called CommonJS. When we use React, it actually uses ES 2015 modules or ES6 modules, which is that import syntax. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. Now we're going to initialize Express into a variable called app, and then that app object will have a listen method, and this is going to take in a port to listen on. And what I usually like to do is create a variable for the port. So I'll set this to, I'm actually going to set this to process.env.port, because what this will do is it'll look for an environment variable called port first, and this will be used in production. But then we're going to say or, and then we could use any port we want. I'm going to use 5000. So basically in development, I'm going to be using port 5000. And then in here we pass in the port, and it can take in a callback if you want something else to happen. I'm just going to do a simple console log here and just say, I'm actually going to put backticks and say server started on port, and then we can put that variable in. All right, so just these couple lines of code should allow us to run the server. So if I go down here, I could do node server.js, but that wouldn't implement nodemon, so I would have to keep restarting it every time I make a change. So to use nodemon, we can say npm run server, because that's the script that we told nodemon to use. And you can see it's started on 5000. Now our server's running, but we don't have any endpoints to hit. Okay, basically there's nothing to really do with our server. We can open up Postman and we can make a GET request to HTTP localhost port 5000, and we're just going to get back a 404 status, as you can see here, and it just says down here cannot get / and you'd get this same message if you went to a browser and you tried to go to this URL. So what we're going to do is just quickly add an endpoint or add a route here, and we can do that by using app dot and then whatever the request we want to handle, which is a GET request, to let's say just / the home page basically. And then this takes an arrow function with a request and response object, and I'll just use an arrow here, and we'll just do a res.send, and we'll just send hello world. Okay, so now if I save that, nodemon's going to refresh it, and we'll go back to Postman and click send, and we get back a 200 response with hello world. Okay, so res.send is one way to send data. You can actually put HTML in here as well. If you wanted to send a file to the browser, you could use send file. There's a whole bunch of stuff. What we're going to mostly be dealing with is res.json, because this is going to be a JSON API. So I'll just go ahead and put a JSON, or actually a JavaScript object. It doesn't have to be legit JSON. It can be a JS object. And let's just put in a message, and we'll just say welcome to the, we'll say contact keeper API. So let's save that, and we'll go back to Postman and make our request, and you can see we get back some JSON with the message and our message. All right, so in the next video, I just want to start to create some of the routes that we'll be using. So I don't want to put all of our routes in this file here. I want to break them up into separate files. For instance, contacts should have their own routes, users, and then auth. So basically we'll have 3 different files for our routes. All right, so we'll do that next.